So by this point, I hope you've seen the first part of my retrospective look back on CW's The Flash. It's one of my favorite shows and one of the longest running superhero shows in history, right next to the likes of something like Smallville. I had a lot to say, some good, some bad, and some very controversial, but get ready because that's only going to continue as I dive into the next and final 4 seasons that this show has to offer. Starting in the fall of 2019, The Flash had what was probably its most dramatic shift yet in terms of structure. The show was ditching the traditional storyline of revolving around a big bad, and going forward would split each season up into pods called graphic novels, each with their own villain or sometimes villains. The Flash has flirted with doing this a few times in the past. I mean, season 3 had Dr. Alchemy as a minor threat for the first 9 or so episodes, and season 5 had multiple cicadas that they cycled through. Eobard Thawne took over at the end of season 5 as well, even if he only did it for a single episode. However, those don't really compare to what the show ends up doing next. Even if Alchemy was at the forefront, we were still teased with Savitar as early as episode 2. And as far as season 5 is concerned, I mean, I think it's still one villain, it's just Cicada. And Thawne's plotline is tied so heavily into the main arc that it doesn't feel like it's too different once we switch to it. The shift in structure isn't the only thing that was brought on by new showrunner Eric Wallace, who joined the show in season 4. The following seasons of the show introduced some of the craziest and most outlandish things that they'd ever even attempted, for better and worse. It's a big shift from what the show was before, and a large stride into the nonsensical unknown. It's not for everyone, in fact a lot of people hate these seasons, but if you learned anything from the first part of this retrospective, it's that I don't share the opinions of everyone. That being said, there are definitely some things that aren't pretty coming up, so why not rip off the band-aid though and talk about them, starting with The Flash Season 6. I've defended the show a lot in the past, and even more so in the prior hour-long video that I just posted. I like seasons 4 and 5, 2 seasons that are typically saddled with being the worst of the show, so is it really a surprise that I like season 6? Maybe not, but it might be a surprise that season 6 is actually my favorite season of the entire show, and I know that's crazy talk. How can it be better than season 1? The season sucks after Crisis, some say. The show dies this season. And I heaped a ton of praise at season 1, so it might be crazy that I think this one's better. I've said it before in other places, but I think that later seasons of a show often have the potential to be one of the best of the show. I think that because once all the pieces are in place, shows can truly go wild, and The Flash season 6 is a big showing of that. It's got all the characters established so we can get some great drama with them. It's also got most of its lore figured out and established so new lore can take its place and grow into something that's way cooler. And like I said in my long preamble for the video, this is the first season of the show to take on a new format and split itself into 2 distinctive chunks. So going forward, I'll be talking about each season in chunks like they aired, and I'll talk about the subplots and everything as they come up if they branch into the next arc. It'll make sense when you guys see it, I promise. Season 6 opens up with the show's first graphic novel, as the new showrunner Eric Wallace calls them, and it's called Blood and Truth. Immediately from the jump, this season just feels different. The season premiere, Into the Void, is sort of like a mission statement for what the show wants to be going forward. We've ditched the traditional baddie of the week that usually opens the seasons, and we moved into something more grand and, I'll say it, wacky. The villain of this episode is a sentient black hole controlled by a comatose scientist. The show has dabbled in stupid shit in the past, but this is a whole new level, and I absolutely love it. The premiere sets the ground for a lot of what season 6 is, and that's crazy and wacky ideas, saddled with extremely resonant and well done drama. See, throughout this episode, Barry and Iris are also dealing with the loss of Nora. Iris by holding on to whatever of Nora's she can find, even if it almost results in her death, and for Barry, he's diving into being the Flash, guilty that he couldn't save his daughter. He's projecting all of that on those around him, particularly Chester, the scientist that's controlling the black hole. And for the both of them, they're trying to avoid properly grieving because they think they'll just see Nora again one day. It might be true, but it's not a healthy avenue for grief. Pair that with the insanity of the black hole plotline, and again, this is basically how season 6 is going to go. It's really well done character work paired with some of the coolest ideas the show has ever cooked up. Speaking of really cool ideas though, it's time to talk about the main villain of the first half, which is Ramsey Rosso, also known as Bloodwork. Bloodwork is an interesting villain from an outside of the show perspective because he's the first villain on the show since Reverse Flash, to be an actual Barry Allen villain in the comics. You see Zoom, Savitar, the Thinker, and Cicada, they're all villains of the Flash, yes, but they're villains of Wally West. Bloodwork is a return to Barry Allen villains, and at the time, this was the first villain the show has pulled from the current comics going on at the time. Well, except for Godspeed in Season 5's 18th episode, but we'll talk about him, don't worry. Bloodwork is such a compelling antagonist in this show, and 90% of the time it's due to Sindhil Ramathuri's terrific performance. He placed the character with such a wonderful blend of pure evil and earnest intentions to help the human race that it does so much of the heavy lifting. Every time I rewatch this opening arc, which is a lot, I'm still captivated by him, and he might be my favorite villain of the entire show. I mean, look, Thawne's great, but in just 8 episodes, Ramsey eclipses most of the show's other villains with extreme ease. I've been saying villains need to be characters too, and Ramsey is the best character since Eobard Thawne. Barry and Ramsey, despite never meeting before now, share a wonderful dynamic. You see, since I'm not talking about the crossovers, I might have neglected to mention that at the end of the premiere, Barry is visited by the Monitor and informed that he's gonna die very soon. And Ramsey has HLH, which is a rare blood cancer. He watched his mother die from it, giving into the disease and letting it consume her, and he refuses to do the same. He views Barry in the same light that he viewed his mother in, someone who's just letting death wash over them. The two are both careening toward the cliff of non-existence, and it leads to a villain that feels so much more personal to Barry than ever before, especially when he offers Barry a way to survive the oncoming crisis. It just requires Barry to give up the only thing that makes him a hero, his humanity. The first half of the season culminates in what I truly believe to be the best episode of the entire show, which is The Last Temptation of Barry Allen Part 1. It's payoff to several seasons of pent-up tension between Barry and the source of his powers, the Speed Force, and the fallout is one of the best scenes Gustin has probably ever delivered, and it's so emotionally satisfying that this episode alone places Season 6 in at least the top 3 seasons of the show. Part 2 of this episode is also a really great one, maybe not because of the writing, but because it's a zombie invasion of Central City, which I think is just equally as cool as an introspective look into Barry's mind. These 2 episodes are just really cool, and I think they work together in ways that are hard for me to describe without you just having seen it. Again, I might have brushed over these 2 episodes, but really, if you haven't watched the show in a while, if you dropped it after season 3 or 4, go back and watch the first half of season 6 because it's truly great. It's wacky, it's crazy. There's literally a scene where Barry is torn between the Speed Force and Ramsey as they try and separate him, and I just think that's really cool. And that's another thing about season 6. Remember I said we go back to season 1 where the camp and comic book elements are blended well with good character work? Those elements are even crazier in season 6. Ramsey is one of the show's most interesting and fleshed out antagonists, and he even turns into a giant monster with a claw hand in the finale of his arc. And it works. It doesn't even feel out of place. In the second half of the season, Barry and Grodd fuse inside of Grodd's mind in the same episode that Barry overworks himself due to losing his parents' graves after Crisis. And it works. Speaking of the second half of season 6, I think it's really great. I mean, look, it's not as good as the first half, but to pretend like there's some huge quality gulf is just disingenuous to me. It's certainly not as tightly knit and well paced as the opening arc of season 6, but the second half contains some of the best episodes of the entire season and manages to tackle concepts in a really cool way. I mean, look at episode 11. Even if it's one of the weaker episodes of the season featuring some pretty terrible comedy, I mean, it manages to illustrate that something is different between Barry and Iris after the crisis, all the while being a fairly light Valentine's Day goofball episode. Iris, having been abducted and swapped out with a mirror clone, is acting off indifferent toward Barry. He notices something's wrong and immediately tries to figure it out, but is told by her and Joe that maybe post-crisis Iris is just a different person. He's manipulated and steps down, and it just ends up building into a distrust that he has for her, and it culminates very well later in the season. Episode 13, Grodd Friended Me, is just so fucking cool. It's literally Barry inside of Gorilla Grodd's head, and it features an insanely awesome moment where the two of them fuse, and Grodd has super speed to take down Solivar. It makes no sense, but it was one of the most unforgettable moments in the entire show, because it felt like it was straight out of a comic book in all of the best ways. I still remember watching this episode and going onto the Flash subreddit and just typing, "Big Monkey Go Fast," and that's the entire vibe of the episode. It's a really enjoyable episode, but again, it has a lot of emotional moments because Barry is searching for his parents' graves so he can visit them, but he finds out that they've changed locations after Crisis. I think it's haunting and sad, and then pair that together with the fact that he merges with the gorilla and has super speed. It's crazy. It shouldn't work together, but it does. Episode 14, entitled Death of the Speed Force, and if you can't tell from the name alone, does the craziest thing imaginable and just completely kills the Speed Force. Sure, it's another Barry loses his speed plot, but it's done in a much more interesting way this go around because the speed isn't gone all at once. It's running out, and the tension that ends up bringing in subsequent episodes is really cool. I think it's a little dumb that Barry can just burn off speed by being mad, and sometimes it was pretty muddy about how much speed he did have left, but overall I think this added a lot of fun moments to the latter chunk of the season. Another thing that episode in this plot does is give stakes to the crisis. While I didn't talk about it here, it could be a little annoying how much of season 6 is built up and around Barry's inevitable death and crisis, only for him to survive unscathed. I'm not saying it's bad that he survived, we all knew he would, but by killing the Speed Force through the Spectre, poisoning it, it allows for the event to have lasting consequences on Barry even if he didn't die. He's powerless now and has to figure out a way to go on without that. And I think The Exorcism of Nash Wells is a fantastic episode in showing that. With everything crumbling down, Barry's marriage having strains, you know, fighting this new foe in Joseph Carver that he doesn't even know about, and just all these post-crisis changes, it can be crazy when on top of that Eobard Thawne is back and Barry doesn't even have the speed powers. It's a surprisingly fantastic coda to season 5 while also highlighting Nash Wells, which I know I don't talk about the Wells a lot, but it's just there's not much to talk about with some of them. Again, I'll touch on them as we get there. Nash Wells in season 6 is pretty forgettable. This episode does a lot of cool things to push forward his narrative, and I think it's cool that he ends up being pariah in Crisis, but again, when I'm not talking about Crisis, certain characters that are related to the Crisis are going to fall out of interest for my script, so that's why I haven't really talked about Nash that much or any of the other Wells. However, I think it is really, really cool that all of the Wells are sort of just get stuffed into Nash's head, including Eobard Thawne. It might not make that much sense, but I just assume that since he's the version of Wells that are so long, just don't think about it, bro. Just don't think about it. One of my issues that I had with season 5's ending is that Thawne just kind of gets away. This episode doesn't fix that issue, but it does give you a little bit more weight to it. Barry blames Thawne for the death of Nora, and in this episode he's able to come to terms with it and even tells Thawne that he can't hurt him anymore. It's a major turning point for their dynamic, and it's something it'll flesh out a lot more as the series goes on, but I'm a big fan of where Barry and Thawne's rivalry goes after this episode. I briefly mentioned earlier Iris being a mirror clone, and yeah, that's basically the main plot of season 6's second half. I haven't talked about it a lot, and that's because it's pretty stupid, but mostly in a good way. It helps that the show treats it deadly seriously. It's like the invasion of the body snatchers, and it's actually pretty cool to see each person get abducted. I think it could be argued that it took a little too long to progress, and I won't disagree, but the episodes where it crescendos are really cool, so I'm not that bothered by it. Liberation is episode 17, and I think it's an exceptional hour of television. It builds upon the mistrust that Barry's been having grow in him toward Iris, and it culminates in him figuring everything out. It's just a roller coaster of an episode. There's twists and turns, and the climax is harkening back to what I said about the concept being goofy, but handled extremely well. Barry's powerless and beat to a bloody pulp by his mirror clone of a wife, and then her hands turn into swords. Mirror Iris then reclaims her agency and has to be killed by her creator. I didn't even mention how this episode manages to tie the entire season together. One of the early concerns that I had with splitting seasons up into chunks was I was worried that the two halves wouldn't feel like one season or would end up creating a disjointed experience. Luckily, season 6 doesn't do that and instead starts planting its seeds right from the jump. The entire first half of the season, while focused on blood work mainly, is also building up to Crisis on Infinite Earths and focusing on a conspiracy that Iris is investigating with her newspaper. Hell, an entire episode, licensed to Elongate, is focused on Ralph and Barry looking for Sue Dearborn, someone intrinsically tied to the Black Hole and Eva plotline. It's a really great episode too. I recommend watching that one. In the second half of the season, the show manages to utilize changes brought on by Crisis on Infinite Earths to connect the two halves, but also continues the through lines established in the first arc by having Iris go full in on the conspiracy angle. And we finally get answers to who Black Hole is. Liberation goes a step further by actually bringing back Ramsey and having him be the key that Eva needs to escape the mirror. It's a really, really cool moment that makes the entire season click into place and feel like one grand and cohesive narrative. I guess I should go ahead and discuss Eva. Yeah, she's alright. I mean, we don't get a lot of her in season 6 proper, and most of her screen time she's not even an outright villain, but I think she's fine. I will say I do like the concept of a villain that's working in the shadows basically the entire time, to the point where the heroes don't even know anything about her. When she debuts in episode 17, Barry never even had a clue that she existed, and I think it's really cool to see him so shocked. Her dynamic with Iris is interesting enough, but again, in season 6's proper, she doesn't have that much time as a main villain. A lot of that time is instead spent with her husband, Joseph Carver. He's not anything to write home about, but I do find him to be a pretty fun antagonist. I think him and his assassins are cool, and I think the organization of Black Hole had a lot of potential that unfortunately it never really capitalized on. Still, Carver is such a smarmy and assholish dude that it was really fun to see him occasionally go up against Team Flash. He also worked to allow it for a villain like Eva to even exist. He was the bad guy we were led to believe was the real threat, meanwhile she's building up. It's really cool, and when we get to the switch in episode 19, it helps the episode feel more like a finale. I really like how Carver is trying to have Team Flash help him, even though he still goes about it in such a slimy way. Like, he just wants the protection. He doesn't really care about anything going on with the Mirrorverse. He just knows that if Eva's out, she's gonna kill his ass. Yeah, I mentioned that episode 19 is the finale, and if that seems early, it's because it is. Season 6 didn't get to end properly. If you can't tell, I really do love this season, and I wish it got the ending it deserved. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic had other ideas. You see, the second half of season 6 climaxes right around March of 2020, which is when the nationwide lockdowns in America and Canada and all around the world really kicked into gear. Still though, I'd argue that Success is Assured is actually a fairly strong closer for season 6. It manages to end the season on a major battle for Team Flash. It's a huge turning point. Eva's killed Carver, Barry's completely out of speed, and the team has essentially just lost. It's a really great episode on its own, and I think it's a fascinating place to end this season, and it's pretty cool that the villain won, even if it wasn't intentional at all. I mean, sure, it hurts the season somewhat. Barry's speed still isn't back, Iris is still trapped in the Mirrorverse, but these are things that I think could be cool to leave hanging for another season. I don't really have much to say when it comes to characters in the season. They mostly just work as well as they did in season 5. And I think that's basically how this season feels. Don't get me wrong, a lot of it is different, but when I think about the next 3 seasons that we're going to talk about, they feel like almost a radically different show after a point. But season 6 feels like season 5, just refined to a more precise point, in my opinion, with a new structure and everything, sure, but it still feels like the show that we had in season 5 before we transition into the mess of a television show that the rest of the show is. The first half is home to the best stretch of episodes of the entire show, and while the second half has its own issues, I've talked about them, I still think it's great, and I think it stands up to the first half when it comes to a quality of storytelling and individual episodes. There's some absolute standout episodes, there's some great moments, there's a lot of fantastic character work. It's my favorite season of the show, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. That's season 7. Season 6, I'm stupid. Cut that out. If it isn't clear, I think The Flash started off exceptional, started to stumble, fell flat on its face, and then I think that it has slowly recovered, finally getting back to the levels of its debut season with season 6. Coming off from season 6, I was incredibly excited to see where the show could go next. I mean, it ended early and we had almost an entire year before it came back. Season 6 ended in May of 2020, and we didn't get the first episode of season 7 until February of 2021. From the jump, season 7 executed basically everything perfectly. The premiere All's Wells That Ends Wells, while meant to be in episode 20 of season 6, ended up working very well as a jumping on point. Part of that was due to the fact that Success is Assured works so well as a finale, but also because the episode sets up a ton of new things for the final chunk of the season. It develops Eva more as a villain, with her hunting down and trying to stop the remnants of Black Hole. It introduces the artificial Speed Force after several episodes of teasing it, and it ends with Barry having a speed back, ready to just take the fight directly to Eva, or as they call her now, Mirror Monarch. The episode's also just really fun, with Barry being taken over by all the Welleses and swapping through it and seeing Grant Gustin go ahead and try and do an impersonation of every Wells as an exit for the character of Harrison Wells. Fantastic episode. I think that the final goodbye he gets while he dies to birth the artificial Speed Force, I think is a great scene. Thought Streak does continue with episode 2, Speed of Thought. I think this episode is just plain awesome. You see, when Barry got his speed back, it gave Barry a new power, which was speed thinking. Unfortunately, due to the ability to understand everything all at once, Barry lost the ability to think uncritically, and his emotions vanish. They also chalk this up to being the artificial Speed Force, and it's not made from emotion, it's artificial, which power of love and friendship. I understand where they're going, but this is how I understood it. I think this episode is really fun. I mean, it features Killer Frost gaining super speed and engaging in a speedster battle with Barry, which is kind of fucking crazy. I really love the climax too, with Barry realizing what he did wrong and destroying the artificial Speed Force. You know, he pulls Iris out of the mirror and everything, but it's not a victory because he could have killed her in doing that. And I think it's a really good moment where he learns that he doesn't need these new powers rather than he needs himself. I mean, it's a very standard story and it's kind of cheesy, but I really like how they execute it within this episode. And I think this would have been a really, really awesome episode to have at the penultimate of the season, but it works very well as a second episode as well. Unfortunately, that plunges us directly into the grand finale of this battle against Eva and the mirror stuff altogether, which is season 7, episode 3, entitled Mother. We learn that Eva is actually a mirror clone herself, which sort of doesn't really make sense. Iris is comatose in this finale, and Barry is once again powerless, and the city is once again under siege by an army created by the Big Bad. This finale is essentially just a copy of The Last Temptation of Barry Allen Part 1, the resolution of Blood and Truth, the first graphic novel of season 6. I think this could be seen as a parallel, and I would be inclined to agree, but it does make an already shaky finale feel a little worse at the end of the day. I don't dislike Mother entirely, but again, it's very shaky. It's structurally uninteresting due to being so similar to the end of the Bloodwork graphic novel, especially because that episode is far more interesting in how it tackles Barry not being around to be the hero. In that episode, he's under Ramsey's control, and I think the Blood Brothers with being zombies are far more interesting. And I think the resolution of that episode is a lot more interesting too, because they have to focus on bringing Barry back and not bringing Eva to the good side. Eva doesn't feel nearly as compelling as Ramsey in general, and Barry's lack of speed just isn't interesting at all because we've already seen him not have speed. As cool as it was for him to destroy the negative speed force, it is a little annoying that they take the entire episode essentially to get his powers back. I understand how they reboot the speed force, and I don't think it's an issue really. People go on and on about it being they brought it back with the power of love and it's cheesy, but I do think it's based off the lore of the show. I mean, they established back in season 6 that Barry has residual speed force even when it is dead, so it makes sense how Iris has it inside of her as a leftover from her time as a speedster in season 4. I guess my only major issue with this resolution is it makes the past few episodes spent developing the artificial speed force feel wasted, since we know Barry could have just rebooted the entire speed force through his remaining link. Still, it's cool to do it through Iris, and it's a great way to wake her up. I think the music here in the scene where he fully gets his powers back, I think it's a really great moment, and I think that it really does in the death of the Speed Force arc in a pretty good way. The redemption of Eva makes a lot of sense, and it goes down easier considering how fun the set piece is prior, but again, she doesn't get as much time to develop as she needed to truly work as a compelling villain. This entire finale, while not terrible, is very much the weakest spot of the Mirror arc, and it's a shame that the arc stumbles at the end, because the rest of it was pretty damn good. I don't think this ruins it, or even makes the arc fully bad, but I think it takes a story that was already struggling and ends it on such a limp note. Honestly, season 6 ending early really hurt season 7 more than season 6, because now we've essentially climaxed 3 episodes early into season 7, and we really don't have any clear plan. Unfortunately, as you go forward in time and people get away from the COVID-19 pandemic and watch this show, they're going to be a little confused of why they ended off season 6 on such a massive cliffhanger, only to resolve it in the first 3 episodes of season 7. If I thought the closing episode of the Mirror arc was not very good, the rest of season 7 does not fare any better. In fact, Speed of Thought might be the peak of the entire season. Even though the Mirror graphic novel ends poorly, I do like it. However, the next graphic novel is really where the show goes to shit. I'm sorry for using such a completely informal term when it comes to the quality of the show, but it really does simply go to shit. From the stretch of episodes 4 through episodes 11, only one episode is good, and it's episode 5, entitled Fear Me. The rest range from utterly inoffensive to downright atrocious. During the Forces arc, entitled God Complex for some reason, the show is lacking in anything that resembles quality, nuance, storytelling, coherence, good acting, anything really. These are some of the worst episodes that we've ever had out of this show, with some of the worst dialogue and ideas that we've ever had out of this show.
The love that Iris and I have for each other, that love is a part of you.
Oh my God, bro.
Oh, hell.
Central City Strong balances admittedly decent character work for Barry and Iris, focusing on them reconnecting, but struggling to find time with one another. It does end with a nice scene of Iris visiting a support group for a time in the Mirrorverse. Unfortunately, that's basically the end of her trauma. I think it's fun that you can solve weeks and months of trauma through one session of group therapy. The rest of the episode is completely uninteresting though. Abracadabra's back from season 3 and he's okay, but he's not in a good episode again, and he's killed immediately after a half-assed and overly sappy redemption. The introduction of the first major villain of season 7, the Forces of Nature, is so thrown together that I remember watching it on vacation when it aired, and I audibly gasped, and not in the good way. The Strength Force, dubbed Fuerza, she just shows up, she bitch slaps Abracadabra, and is portrayed by one of the worst CGI models the show has ever rendered. The rest of the forces are introduced in better fashion, at least. Psyche, the personification of the Sage Force, gets one of the better episodes of the season, like I mentioned earlier, with Fear Me, a great episode that has some cool horror elements, a really dope climax, and just, again, is a good example of how you can introduce these forces with it not sucking. The introduction of Dion was solid, even if the one with the 90s feels like a script they threw together in half an hour. The dinosaur was pretty cool. And of course, if the villains are forces, we're also treated to the reborn Speed Force, portrayed by Michelle Harrison. She's portrayed the Speed Force before, and I generally do like her appearances, especially in something like The Last Temptation of Barry Allen Part 1. However, I think this was a really bad call for a bunch of really bad reasons. For one, the show never does anything with the fact that she looks like his mom. Aside from a few offhanded mentions and conversations with Iris and Barry, for the bulk of the arc, I don't think they do anything with the fact that the major villain of this graphic novel looks and sounds exactly like Barry's mother. Moreover, the way that Iris acts throughout this arc, I feel, is near character assassination. Her inclusion of Nora into their home, despite one of the only times Barry objecting to her existence, really pissed me off, and then her constant veering into absurdity at the mention that Nora is a person. We really need to talk about the central conflict of the Forces graphic novel, because it revolves strictly around the idea that Nora, the Speed Force, is not a person. She is a force of nature which has taken the body of Barry's mother. The waters get a bit muddier when it comes to the other forces, because in the show it seems as though Dion, Alexa, and Bashir are all chosen by individual forces to be their avatar, as the show calls it. They were all normal people with their own goals and aspirations that are now forces of natures and essentially gods. Which does raise the question, did the Speed Force reanimate Barry's dead mother's body? Anyway, I initially imagined they were what Barry is to the Speed Force. However, as the story goes on, they seem pretty keen to establish that these individuals are closer to just the embodiments of their forces than they are to Barry. That kind of sucks, because where does that make Barry? He's not the avatar, so I guess he's just a user of it. But then it seems kind of weird that the Flash isn't even the avatar of his own force. The concept continues to get more and more confusing, as in Season 8 they bring back the concept of forces and avatars, and establish the Reverse Flash as the avatar of the negative Speed Force. It makes sense, except again, Barry isn't the avatar, Nora is. Or is she? I don't even know what an avatar is. Aren't they the blue people from the James Cameron movie? What am I talking about again? And then they start talking about family, and this is where I just... Look, I've talked about Season 7's first half like twice now, once in its own dedicated video, and another in a video about Season 7, but this has got to be when the season just veered off into complete embarrassment for me. See, when Barry and Iris brought back the Speed Force, it's like they birthed it. And when they brought the Speed Force back, they also created 3 separate forces, the Still, Sage, and Strength Force, so they had quadruplets. I understand the narrative idea, but I find it to be so cringy and ham-fisted that it made me want to shut the TV off multiple times. Not only is it incredibly embarrassing for a grown man, Psyche, to keep referring to Barry as dad, but it leads to moments and episodes with allegories that shouldn't be attempted by CW's The Flash. For instance, in the episode Timeless, Barry goes back in time to uncreate the forces and give all these people their lives back. He's given a way to do it that won't alter the timeline at all, which I think is already an ass pull, but okay. And then he gets a pep talk from Joe that boils down to, they're your kids, Barry, you can't just kill them. And it all culminates with Barry ready to pull the trigger and get rid of the forces, only to be stopped after seeing the beauty of creation. I'm not sure if this was intentionally an allegory for abortion, but I think the show did it anyway, and I'm not entirely sure how well it actually executed that. Perhaps it's a topic for another video, but I feel like I'm not reading too far into it. This graphic novel is only 8 episodes long. Episodes 7 and 8 seem to exist just to make me, JayTheZoomster, personally angry. We halt all forward momentum on the Forces storyline to have the introduction to Chillblaine, quite possibly this one of the worst characters in all of fiction, and the introduction of Kristen Kramer, probably the second worst character in all of fiction. I struggle to even understand what this arc does except for wipe away Frost's criminal record, which I think everyone had already kind of forgotten about. I really see no reason to derail an entire storyline just so we can focus on an episode in which Killer Frost is on trial and being threatened with the metahuman cure, which again, I should add, would do nothing to her because it negates dark matter, of which her powers do not come from. This arc culminates in Joe departing from the Force, which is... interesting. I mean, he didn't do much in season 6 as captain, and this is a respectable decision for him to make, but it puts his role as a character into even murkier waters, because what does he accomplish on the show now? Like, he was barely in season 6. They wrote him off to be in witness protection, and now he doesn't even have a job. So the following 2 episodes, which conclude the graphic novel, are probably the worst the show has ever produced, and it's hard to imagine it getting worse than where it already was. But yeah, Family Matters Part 1 gives us the reintroduction to my least favorite version of Barry, one who will run headfirst into anything that comes his way without even consulting those around him, and one who pushes his teammates into uncomfortable positions and then wonders why they lash out. I understand the conflict of the episode is trying to train Fuerza, something so powerful that it lashes out back, but I genuinely don't think the show had ever been this dull before. Everything has been done before. There's legitimately nothing new about the conflict of this episode. Not to mention, Cisco gets fucking sucker punched by Fuerza and walks it off. Didn't that shit kill Abracadabra like fucking 4 episodes ago? What follows in part 2 is unfathomably cringe. The Flash delivers its worst finale since season 3's finish line, and is this already unsatisfying arc in the most limp and flat way possible. Not only is it a terrible conclusion, it is a confusing one. None of this episode makes any sense, and every twist and reveal is immediately undone by the following scene. Barry hides the forces from the Speed Force inside the Speed Force, which blows my mind how they came up with that idea, and the climax of the episode is full of VFX work that makes me wonder if the show even has a budget anymore. Like, I get it's kind of a cool scene, but what is this? It lasts for barely any time, and it looks like a video game cutscene, and not even a good CGI rendered one. Like, it looks like it was rendered in engine. Then all this results in Barry redeeming the Speed Force, proving that she is sort of kind of human after all, as he runs around the city with a lightning tornado of different colors while shit just happens on the screen. I'm confused. Recapping this, I'm confused, and I've seen this episode 4 or 5 times. I understand they couldn't do physical action, but still, what we end up getting is not good. And then the Frost storyline has to get a conclusion too, I guess. She gets out of prison in a single episode. Why did we waste 2 important episodes of this graphic novel on that then? Not to mention she's fighting Chillblaine throughout the episode, and they like intersperse it throughout the 42 minutes of the episode. But the episode clearly takes place over like an entire day, and this fight scene takes place in like 10 minutes. So as far as the editing of the episode, it makes absolutely fucking no sense how that works. And then there's the stock footage that they show when they're trying to redeem Nora, and Dion puts a vision in her head, which Dion didn't even have powers like that. That's Sykes' powers to put visions into people's heads. And then at the start of the episode, when they killed everyone at the end of episode 10, and the Bashir's like, we're actually all alive, and then they reveal that the forces are trying to kill the Speed Force, and the Speed Force reveals she's trying to kill the Force, and it turns out they actually need to come together and they're not trying to kill each other. At the end of the day, again, I just don't know what we gained from this arc. I guess it was the introduction of those new forces and their characters, but with the show concluding and how it didn't even feature these characters, it's hard to say that they mattered at all. The finale of it ends with Barry and Iris being so inspired by their Force family they decide to have one of their own, and I guess it leads to Barry and Iris having Nora, but it just feels like a complete waste of 8 episodes. I would have infinitely rathered that we had more of Mirror Monarch and the Eva stuff and Mirror stuff than any of this shit. Please, I'm really not sure I've ever seen a show fall off quite as fast and as hard as The Flash did between season 6 and 7. And it's a tragedy, but the worst part is we're only a little over halfway through with the season. I do think the second half of season 7 is a dramatic improvement over the first. Your mileage might vary as to what that means, but for me it means that I'm a little entertained for once in the season. Goodbye Vibration does us all a mercy killing and finally boots Cisco from the show. Look, I used to love Cisco, and I enjoy his early season additions a lot, but again, by season 5, I was ready for him to go, and despite being good in the first half of season 6, he should have just hit the road at the end of season 5. By the time he leaves in season 7, I'm not sad to see him go. I'm happy that he's gone. This episode is really fun, though. A lot of people hate it, and after the dour and emotionless and bleak and boring and nonsensical and stupid and bad and gross, after all of that, I was happy to have Barry just start breakdancing. That scene is awesome, and it's a much better tone for the show to be in than anything we had in the first half. And I think that's true of the second half of the season entirely. We settle more into a rhythm of, say, something like season 4. It's campy and stupid, but in a way that I can enjoy. Masquerade is a surprisingly solid Barry light episode, and one that deals with the character of Cecile. She might have had a highly increased amount of screen time starting in 4 and continuing into 5, but her screen time only balloons from here. There's a reason people called the show The Cecile by the end of season 9. Still though, I think this episode is really cool and does great things for her character. Using Psycho Pirate as a one-off villain was a really dope idea, and I like how it actually expands upon the fact that Cecile got randomly struck by lightning. I didn't even bring that up. She got randomly struck by lightning in the climax of the Forces graphic novel. Any goodwill, though, that the season may have gained over these past 2 episodes is melted away by episode 14, Rayo de Luz, which the literal translation of that is just light ray. Very creative title, guys. Look, I don't even want to talk about this episode. I don't want to give this episode a platform to stand on. I don't want to give this episode more power than it has. It has absolutely nothing to offer. It is boring. It's focused on Allegra, who is boring. The season has done nothing for her. She is very boring. And it brings back one of the more boring aspects of season 6 in the form of her cousin Ultraviolet. There's no reason for this episode to exist. I know I said the Black Hole Assassins are cool in theory, and I think they are in that season as part of Joseph Carver's team. They serve no reason to be in the show after Joseph Carver. I do not care about the cousin connection between Allegra and Ultraviolet. I do not care at all.
Oh, who's ready for a snack attack?
Now you might be thinking to yourself, Jay, those 3 episodes sound like filler. What about the next arc? That's a great question. You see, I mentioned in my season 6 section that a big chunk of the first half of the second half of season 6 were one-off episodes. Yeah, season 7 attempts something very similar here. I think the big issue with it, though, is that season 6, those episodes were good. On a more serious note, I think it's a structural issue first and foremost. You see, while those episodes were more standalone, they were slotted in after the first episode of the Mirror Arc, so even if they weren't directly focused on the graphic novel, we were still fed little pieces as time went on. The interlude episodes, as they're called in season 7, serve as nothing more than fluff. We have no hints at the next storyline, absolutely zero through lines aside from any subplots with Allegra's cousin and Joe teaming up with Kristen Kramer. Oh. Filler episodes can already be annoying, but when they're not great and the show lacks any forward momentum at all, they can ruin the entire show. It does not help that we came off of the worst storyline the show's ever attempted and are immediately given episodes that, honestly, you could just toss in the garbage bin and not really lose anything at all. With the exception of information relating to Kristen Kramer and Ultraviolet, the rest of the season goes off without a hitch. Speaking of, let's talk about the Godspeed imperative. You see, Godspeed was originally introduced back in season 5 as a one-off rogue from Nora's time period. She stops him, we celebrate, episode ends. Then in the season 6 premiere, he's introduced again as a villain that Barry's been trying to stop clones of for the entire summer. It's a weird jump, but I'm with it, I guess. It adds a nice bit of mystery to the whole thing. Then in the heat of the Mirror storyline, an episode I didn't get a chance to talk about because I thought it was more relevant here, we're giving Pay the Piper, where Godspeed returns. Godspeed's appearance here doesn't do anything to forward the story, and really the episode's more interesting for what it does with having Hartley Rathaway back and the team up between him and Barry. There's some cool speedster chasing going on here, but that's literally it. He's just here for Barry's speed. He has no real motivation, and the costume I guess is cool, and he has a neat voice, but nothing beyond surface level mystery of how does he have clones now? Why does he want Barry's speed? And again, we get no answers to that here. Season 7, however, promised to answer that, and more in its final storyline. And how did the show pay justice to its longest running mystery in the history of it? 4 episodes. The arc is 4 episodes long. Now, one can imagine that some of the heavy lifting was done already. I mean, we knew Godspeed was in the present. We knew he wants speed. We know who he's after. It's Barry. So we should just jump in and meet the real Godspeed, and that's it. It'd essentially be like a 6-episode arc once you factor in the season 6 premiere and episode 18 of season 6, right? Nope. The show has to be complicated and stupid. So it turns out, not only does Godspeed have clones, but he has 2 factions of clones that are fighting each other. One of them wants to serve Godspeed, while the other knows that if Godspeed wins and absorbs them all, they die. Also, the real Godspeed is in present day, and he's amnesic, and he wants organic speed. Oh, and also Bart and Nora are here out of nowhere. Wait, who's Bart, you ask? Well, he's their son, who just exists now. Anyways, they have to save the city, but the Godspeed clones fighting are too much, so they decide to give August the real Godspeed, organic speed, whatever the fuck that is, which in turn gives him his memories back and makes him evil. How does that work? I don't know. And then everyone gets super speed powers except Wally, who just doesn't come back at all, and they fight the clones until Barry and Godspeed fight one-on-one, and then uh-oh, here comes Eobard Thawne. Where'd he come from? The Speed Force, of course. You see, Speed Force Nora, not to be confused with Barry's daughter Nora, grants Eobard Thawne a full body again. It just so happens to look like Tom Cavanaugh because he's the only guy they could get to come back to the show who wants to work on this dumpster fire. And then Barry and Thawne battle Godspeed with lightning lightsabers that they materialize out of thin air and know how to use, despite having zero formal training. They beat Godspeed in one of the coolest sword fights I've seen on network television, and he's only been a real villain for like half an episode. Barry lets Thawne go for some reason, while everyone else congratulates Barry and Iris on renewing their vows, and Jordan Fisher sings us a nice cover that is totally not drowned in bad autotune. The end. Now on the surface, that might all sound doable in 5 episodes, but did I mention that Diggle also shows up? Oh, and Joe and Kristen Kramer are dicking around in a forest for half an episode, but then it turns out Kristen Kramer is a metahuman that can copy dark matter powers, and she gets super speed for a second. But wait, it's established in episode 16, literally 2 episodes prior, the Godspeed clones have artificial speed and not organic dark matter speed, because one of the clones escaped from the pipeline. So how did the Kramer steal the speed if it's not dark matter? Oh, and also Allegra and Ultraviolet are working on removing Ultraviolet's voice encoder. Then Ultraviolet leaves to take on the remains of Black Hole, only to die off screen. And of course, Frost and Chillblain have stuff to do, because Chillblain got out of prison early too. I don't fucking know. The prison system in Central City must suck. And that's not mentioning how the show is setting up season 8 plot lines, because Iris is just fucking missing from episodes involving her pregnancy. There's an entire episode where Barry thinks Iris is pregnant, does a test, finds out she's not, and then it's up to Dion to show up in an admittedly cool scene to tease something that won't be resolved until the end of the next season. After the Godspeed arc, I can't imagine how the show could possibly fuck up another long-running mystery-focused storyline. I'm excited! And of course the arc has to take time to reintroduce Nora, a brand new version that's not the same one from season 5, except, okay, she basically is, as well as introduce their son, who actually is a brand new character, and establish that Jay Garrick is now on this earth. Did I mention the show celebrates 150 episodes here too? If you're confused and you haven't seen the show, that was an illustration of how confusing, muddled, and downright baffling the final 4 episodes of the season are. And yet, it's still not the worst part of the season. I think it's pretty fun, actually. Godspeed is a hilarious villain. I love that he calls himself the God of Speed, only to be clowned on within a few minutes. Thawne's return makes almost zero sense unless you're unhinged enough to develop a timeline like I did for this video. It's coming up. But he and Barry share a terrific scene in the finale, and again, I think the lightsaber fight is fucking awesome. It's one of my favorite set pieces of the show. I don't care. Drive a truck into me. I think there's definitely pieces here in this arc that work, but they're drowned out by what doesn't. The character work here is the worst that it's ever been. Characters are either static like Barry, or borderline assassinated like Iris is in the most of the season. Cisco is tiring, and I'm happy that he leaves. Allegra has nothing to add and has a terrible episode. Cecile is just there. She's continuing to become more prominent, but still her character only exists to service other characters. Joe and Kramer should just, if I could time travel, I would go back in time and erase them from the season probably. And Chester is the only good thing to come out of the season because he was introduced in season 6. He's in a couple episodes there. Not really a big factor, but he is fantastic in this season. The amount of times me and my friends have gone like, "What's up, party people?" or just reference Chester. He's such a great character. He's just a joy of a character. I'll talk about him more as the video goes on, but I love Chester. I think I've talked about season 7 of the show more than I've talked about any single topic on my channel that isn't supernatural, but I'm finally glad to close the book on season 7 of The Flash. I give it a 4 out of 10. Fuck it, I give it a 3 out of 10. This shit blows. From the opening moments of Season 8, you're greeted with loads of questions. Why is there some alien dude saying Barry's going to end the world? Why is Joe missing from the premiere? Why am I still watching the show after the Season 7 finale? And all of these get answered in due time, but perhaps the most important question, why am I still watching, is one that I surprisingly found answered pretty quickly. The past 2 seasons were a total roller coaster. We ended Season 6 on an absolute high, with it being my favorite installment of the entire show, only to crash down to the utter depths of quality with Season 7. It was hard to know how to feel going into Season 8. I'm no stranger to shows that get pretty bad at times. I've talked length about Supernatural, and it had a period around this point where it dragged too. So I mean, I was willing to give the show at least one more shot, and you know what? Season 8 is pretty good. Like, it's actually really good. Season 7 oftentimes felt like the show was throwing nonsensical storytelling at us because it ran out of ideas, and there was a lack of steam with nothing really making sense. Season 8, on the other hand, feels like they're throwing ideas at us because they're just so damn creative. That can be seen in the first graphic novel of the season, a 5-part event that features appearances from characters throughout the entire Arrowverse, entitled Armageddon. The show gives us the first real look at Alien since Season 3's crossover entitled Invasion in the form of Despero. He's an outcast from the planet Kalinor who's seeking refuge on Earth, and he's from the future, and so he's witnessed a devastation caused by the Flash. That inspires him to go back in time and stop it, which is where the premiere picks up. And here's the thing, Despero is actually a pretty good villain. He's not amazing or anything, and he doesn't touch the best of what the show has to offer, but I found him very engaging. It also probably helped that we've been on a particular bad string of recent villains from this show. While I didn't hate Eva, I found her to be pretty dull and uninteresting, and the Speed Force is easily the worst antagonist the show has attempted thus far. Godspeed, while very funny, is a retread of another villain that I already really didn't care for in the form of Zoom, and he's very stupid and funny. Despero at least has a decent motivation and a good dynamic with Barry, which immediately makes him the best villain since Bloodwork in the first half of Season 6. Part of what makes Armageddon so strong is the way that it utilizes the psychological effect of the events on Barry. I think the best installment of the graphic novel is actually Part 2. Barry's informed that he's got 7 days before he loses his mind. Watching him do that was extremely captivating because you don't know if he's actually losing his mind or if he's just being fucked with. I just found it cool to watch everything collapse around Barry all at once. He learns that he's fired from his job because he was discovered as a rat for Joseph Carver, something he knows can't be possible. Suddenly Star Labs is vacated and due to be torn down because of a nuclear leak. Barry clears Gideon's files and they say goodbye to their home for the last 8 years, and it feels final. Not to mention he's got a brief memory loss stint where he attacks his team. And all of this climaxes in a truly great moment as Barry's informed that Joe's been dead for months and he had no idea. If you can't tell, I really like when the show focuses on psychologically torturing Barry Allen. That seems fucked up to say, but with The Last Temptation of Barry Allen and Liberation, and now this episode being some of my favorites the show's put out, I think the show really does a good job when it really dives into him as a character, and when the show can tackle these psychological elements, I think it's actually really interesting. It all leads to part 3 where Barry willingly asks Black Lightning to remove his powers because he can't be trusted anymore. I love the idea that after Crisis, the League put together the Injustice Protocol, just in case anyone goes off the reservations. It makes for some good continuity between Crisis on Infinite Earths and this, and it makes the pseudo crossover feel a bit more official. Still, this isn't a true crossover, and we quickly find that out as the real menace behind everything isn't Despero or Barry's mental health. It's Eobard Thawne. Following their confrontation at the end of Season 7, Eobard has vowed vengeance on Barry. I love the ending of Season 7 when it comes to these two characters, and Barry showing Thawne that he's moved beyond him is a great escalation of how their dynamic was in Season 6, and leads to Thawne doing his most insane plan yet. He rewrote reality just to dick with Barry. He even ends his rant with a question, a response to Barry's "I got faster, who's faster now?" The man even went as far as to kill Barry when he was a child, and Tom Cavanaugh just delivers this dialogue fantastically.
I killed you as a child.
I think it was at this point and throughout all of part 4 of Armageddon when I fully realized that the show was back. Within the first 10 minutes, Barry and Thawne have a face-off where it's revealed that not only did Thawne kill Joe, frame Barry for multiple crimes, but he's flipped the entire script. Barry is the Reverse Flash, and Thawne is the Flash. He's not only stolen Barry's father's reputation and mind and killed him as a child, but he's stolen his entire life. It's fucking awesome. The rest of the episode is pretty great too, if you excuse some of the horseshit in it. As much as I do really enjoy the episode, it serves as a good micro-examination of the show as a whole in its current state. The A-plot of the episode is quite frankly fantastic. Barry, with the knowledge that he'll be erased from time at midnight, teams up with Damien Dark to undo all of the damage Thawne's caused to time, and I think it's really cool. Unfortunately, it's saddled with some terrible storytelling for the entire B-plot. It's not that I don't like relationship drama, I think it has its place in the show even if it's never very good, but what I don't like at all is relationship drama between two characters set in the future, a future that we will never see again after this episode, and also when that drama is pretty bad. I don't care about Chester and Allegra having a one-night stand. I don't care about Ryan Choi. I don't care about anything in the episode that isn't the main plot. Luckily, I think the main plot is so good that it completely nullifies everything else. But again, that's how the show has been since Season 6 ended, and that's how it's going to be going forward until the end. It's going to have awesome ideas, and they'll be combined with terrible subplots. It really just depends which one wins out. The climax of this episode is truly great. Barry attempts to get through to Iris in a last-ditch effort to make things right. He and her have a good moment, and it seems that he briefly gets through to Iris, which I thought was pretty cool, and I love how the show handles her being his lightning rod. I don't care if people think it's cheesy, their love existing beyond the bounds of time and space is just so damn epic. The show has been cheesy from the start, and I love how it focuses so much on love and family, The ending of this episode with Barry and Thawne causing the Armageddon that Despero saw is just the cherry on top of the cake to how fucking cool this... Top of the cake. Is there cherry on cakes? Part 5 used to annoy me, but I've come around on this episode a lot. While it does feel like Part 4 could have ended the storyline just fine, I think having a coda for it makes sense. I don't care about Mia Queen from Arrow showing up for no reason, but the moral conundrum brought up here is really interesting, with Joe being back from the dead. He offers a perspective about saving Thawne. It's not that they can't save him, it's that they won't. Is it really heroic just to let somebody die? What's wrong with Thawne? Alright. Upon Barry restoring the timeline, he was able to use some techno-doodad to merge every desperate timeline the show has had into one single and unified timeline. The result is Eobard Thawne no longer exists. I guess I should discuss his entire timeline now, right? It's as good as time as any. Welcome to JayTheZoomster's timeline class. Today's episode is on Eobard Thawne. Eobard Thawne is a scientist from the future, specifically the year 2151. In that future time, he learns that he is to become the Flash's greatest enemy and grows to hate the idol that he once had. He travels back in time, becoming the Reverse Flash, and he battles the Flash throughout centuries. Eventually, the two have a fight that results in the death of Barry's mother, and Thawne is consequently stuck in the past. He trains Barry throughout the years of 2014 and 2015 so that he can return home because Barry's fast enough to open a wormhole to send him home. However, his attempt is thwarted as Eddie Thawne, his distant relative, attempts to shoot himself, succeeding and ending his bloodline early, which erases Eobard Thawne from existence. Now, it should end there and be cut and dry, however, things don't happen like that. If you recall back to the first part of this retrospective, in Season 2 it's revealed that Eobard Thawne actually becomes a time remnant. What's a time remnant? Well, go watch that episode. Now we have two versions of Eobard Thawne. There's one that exists to preserve the timeline, and another that can wreak as much havoc as he wants. The first one will never be touched, but the second one goes on to fight in Legends of Tomorrow. It's unclear how Thawne shows back up after this to be in Crisis on Earth X, but my theory is he just gets resurrected by the Speed Force once again. Show never really explains it. I think there's a blank spot in Thawne's history now, but we do know that at some point between 2017 and 2034, Thawne was arrested and eventually jailed, placed in a cell with Cicada's dagger to remove his powers. He manipulates Nora West Allen and eventually escapes prison, deciding to go off and just do his thing wherever. During the Anti-Monitor crisis, when all of the Welleses were destroyed, for some reason, Eobard Thawne was crammed into the Earth-1 Wells' head. That's crazy! Having fully taken control of Nash, Thawne plans to use the Time Sphere from Season 1 to escape. However, he's successfully exorcised from Nash, turned into nothing but particles of the negative Speed Force. At the peak of the Godspeed War, Barry and Iris recruit the Speed Force to help them in bringing Thawne back. Barry wants his help to take down Godspeed. In doing so, the Speed Force generates a body for Thawne, an avatar, if you will, bringing him back for one final time. However, after Barry resets the timeline in Armageddon, he merges all of them together, and this version of Thawne no longer exists, which is what leads him to fading out of existence. And that's Thawne's timeline. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Back in Armageddon, Barry learns that Thawne hates him because when Thawne was about to make his big moment and become a true hero, Barry upstaged him and saved the day, causing him to resent the Flash. I think this is awesome. I've seen some people say this makes Thawne a child. Thawne's always been childish. He's always been a petty, narcissistic bitch. That's kind of just been his character, so I don't know why people were caught off guard by this. If anything, I think this makes him even better because Barry has a line where it says, only a true sociopath would take something so small and turn it into something so big. And yes, that's the entire point of Eobard Thawne as a character. That's been the point from the beginning. They never shied away from that being the point. I really love Barry and Thawne's dynamic in Season 8 because Barry removes Thawne's speed, and now Thawne is just mad. I initially didn't like this because I thought maybe they should just let Thawne die, but the fact that Thawne says that he should have just died instead was just, it was awesome. It's a really cool thing to do. Remember Despero? Yeah, he sort of gets turned into a nothing burger once Thawne comes into the fray. Again, it's a bit of a shame because he's not a bad villain at all. Barry's haunted by him in the final hour of Armageddon as Despero believes that as long as Thawne lives, he'll be free to destroy the world, a warning we'll see come true later this season. Barry faced off against Despero in a really cool climax, sending him back to where he came from. It's a great ending. I think that Despero, again, was a pretty strong villain. It just kind of sucks he was pushed aside once Thawne came into the fray. Could have been cool to see him as a wild card, but I do think he ends up being good. And I think this finale overall is a fairly good finale to Armageddon. I think it's a very fun one too. And the final fight between Barry and Despero is really, really cool. People bitch about the CGI, but I actually thought it was pretty serviceable here. Armageddon concludes with a restored timeline, Thawne in prison and powerless, and the only thing looming over the team is Iris's time sickness. Yeah, I think Armageddon is easily the best the show has been since season season 6's first half. I think most people even agree with that online. The reception to the show during season 6 first half was very positive. Fell off a cliff for the second half of season 6, only got worse during season 7. But I distinctly remember when season 8 started, a lot of people were very happy with the direction of the show at the moment and thought that Armageddon was pretty cool. Are there issues with Armageddon? Sure. The relationship stuff in part 4 sucks. There are a few logical hoops you have to jump through, like Thawne changing time all willy-nilly without consequences. Though the show does offer an explanation for that, Dion in part 3 says that Thawne accessed the Still Force to change reality in the way that he did. We know this as a power of the Force users have too, because Timeless Wells in season 7 offered to do the same thing to get rid of the Forces. I just said Forces a bunch of times. And yes, I know Timeless Wells isn't confirmed to be a Force user, but come on, he can travel through time and alter time and has the same green particle effect that Dion has. He's a still Force user. I really don't care. Eric Wallace could come and comment on this video and say that Timeless Wells is not a still Force user, and I would not agree with him. So how does season 8 fare after Armageddon? Does it get even better? Does it fall off a cliff like season 7 did? Or does it just steadily stay the same level of quality like the second half of season 6? Well, I think it's a mix of getting better and staying the same. Because before we get to the next arc, we're treated to 2 more interlude episodes, and they're just sort of fine. Impulsive Excessive Disorder is a Nora and Bart episode that feels weirdly placed into the season. It's just kind of an uninteresting episode altogether. Nora and Bart are fun enough characters in small dosage, but I'm glad they never attempted a spin-off with them. I would hate to watch that. Lockdown is an episode with Goldface, and he's one of my favorite rogues on the entire show, bar none. He's fucking funny, dude. I love him. Apparently him and Amunet Black broke up. Sorry for him, but it means that she's not in the episode, so that's better. Unfortunately, Kristen Kramer's in it, and I don't understand. I mean, the B-plot has Killer Frost and Chillblaine doing karaoke, so you should just throw the entire episode away. These interlude episodes struggle for a similar reason that the ones in season 7 do, and that's that they don't really have anything to do with the season as a whole. At least they continue a through line from Armageddon. During all the chaos of that graphic novel, Iris and Dion were working together to cure her time sickness that she caught toward the end of season 7. The end stingers for both episodes 6 and 7 feature callbacks to that specific plotline, so at least there's some semblance of where we're going. But before that, we need to take a pit stop into horror territory and welcome to one of the coolest villains the show has ever had, Deathstorm. The second major graphic novel of the season, entitled Death Revisited, mainly juggles 2 plots: an evil god of death named Deathstorm, and Iris investigating a new metahuman while also struggling to keep her time sickness in check. I really appreciate this graphic novel for one thing above all else, and that's the pacing of it. Death Revisited begins with an episode focused entirely on Barry investigating a mysterious death. They blame it on the hotness guy from season 4. Remember him? He was like, my money, that guy. Yeah, he's back. He's actually really great too. While the parallels between him and Barry are pretty on the nose, they work well enough in ways that elevates the episode a whole lot. The central mystery of who's doing these killings follows us into Phantoms, where we learn that it's a sentient black fire that looks like a skull. Awesome! Phantoms is a damn good episode in my opinion, though. It sets the arc in motion in a very compelling way and gives us all we need to know about the villain without revealing too much. We're not thrust into a story with a fully formed bad guy. We have to watch him grow and evolve and turn into one. We slowly learn that he's going after Caitlin, that all these people that he's killed are connected to her in some way, and we eventually get to a really solid episode focused on Caitlin in the form of resurrection. I think this episode is a little boring at times because it does focus on Caitlin so much, but when it's focused on the main idea of Caitlin wanting to help who she thinks is Ronnie, I think it's pretty cool. It's especially good that we've had Caitlin absent from the past 2 or so episodes where you can really see the black flame attacking people based off of visions and stuff. So she doesn't really know that it can take the form of people that you love that died. So her getting punked into thinking it's Ronnie actually makes a lot of sense. It's a really well executed twist, and the build-up felt like it was a natural course of events. Nothing has really felt rushed or dragged out, and everything just feels like how it should have been. It actually feels like an entire mini season of television and not something just crammed into 6 episodes, which I think is how these should feel. The climax of the storyline, Death Rises and Death Falls, are able to do everything they need to do in those 2 episodes. Death Rises establishes what Deathstorm wants, which is to turn Caitlin into his bride. Turns out it's lonely being a space god of death, and he wants Caitlin. Good for him. I mean, it's a dumb motivation, but I kind of like it. It gives Caitlin actual relevance, and I think that's something that she hasn't had in a long time, and it sort of grounds this omnipotent death god, because I think a lot of the issues you run into with something primordial and larger than life like him is the motivations are typically just boring, like I want to kill everyone. The fact that he has a focused goal on turning Caitlin to his wife is pretty cool. And there's really awesome moments visually throughout the 2 episodes as well. Barry running on his own lightning is a total highlight of the entire season, and Deathstorm himself looks so fucking cool, and honestly really good for being an entirely CGI villain. I like that they don't even skimp on it. Like, for a lot of Despero's arc, he was just a dude. He didn't really have his big CGI form. But no, they go all in with Deathstorm. I mean, sure, he looks like Ronnie for some of the episodes, but for the bulk of his time, I feel like he's mostly just CGI, and it's really, really good CGI. Deathstorm has very awesome dialogue too. If I'm using awesome and cool as adjectives too much, that's just the only way I can describe him. I just think he's a really, really cool villain. The finale manages to tie everything together in a really fun way. Deathstorm separates Team Flash throughout Star Labs, forcing them to all confront different effigies of their own grief. And while it might be the 15th time we've seen Barry yell at a version of his mom, the one we see in the episode is actually fairly compelling, since he rises up against the nightmare knowing that it's fake. We also get a deep dive into Barry having a form of survivor's guilt, which is going to be brought up later. And I like how when Deathstorm realized that he can't fuck with Barry as himself, he goes on to fucking with Barry by talking about people he's let die. I thought that was pretty cool. While it can be a little cheesy and dumb that Frost turns into the anti-Deathstorm named Hellfrost, I think it's a pretty fitting conclusion to that storyline. The final fight against Deathstorm is sort of just whatever though. What makes the episode stand out for me is just the cool horror elements and a lot of great character work. And seeing every character stand up to their own grief was just really, really fun. I think it's a great climax to the entire arc. And even if the final fight is whatever and quick, the visuals of it are really, really cool. And the fact that Frost actually dies. I've never been a fan of this character, don't get me wrong, but seeing her gain actual agency and then end up dying is really, really well written, actually. I think it was a really good way to end the arc, and it gave the arc some actual consequences. All of Death Revisited was very well executed. Deathstorm is one of the show's best villains in my opinion, and what he might lack in motivations and machinations, he makes up for in character and dialogue. Again, he's a god, he's above everyone else. He has lines like "where I'm from is much further than hell," and he even mentions being older than the Monitor. I really like the pacing, I like the development of the overarching plot, and the character stuff was great. Chester in particular has multiple standout moments in both Phantoms and Death Falls. If I had one gripe, it's that the storyline didn't give Barry a lot of plot for himself. It's mainly a Frost and Caitlin story while Barry's relegated to having some quick moments, or, an entire episode like at the beginning, or he's off worrying about Iris. And there's some good stuff that he gets with Iris in the arc, but for the most part, it's focused on Frost and Caitlin, and while the stuff we get with Frost and Caitlin is pretty good, it's hard for me to care too much about it just because I don't like these characters all that much. And what about Iris? Yeah, throughout the majority of the graphic novel, she was off in Coast City with Sue Dearborn. Her and Sue's dynamic was very fun, and I enjoyed seeing them go on a little adventure, and having Iris confide that she's scared of her time sickness to Sue was pretty great. We also get to see a couple of memories of Armageddon that she has, which I thought was really cool, as it pointed to her time sickness allowing her to remember past timelines. I think having the time sickness storyline alongside the Deathstorm storyline was so cool because it's been a long time since I was actually interested in two Flash storylines at once. The developments we get here are really, really fun, and I think they developed the storyline in a really interesting way. The following 3 episodes returns to the show's usual antics of the so-called interludes, but I think the surprising part is they're actually all pretty good. Funeral for a Friend is an entire episode dedicated to the death of Frost, and while it could seem like blatant filler, the show actually has had an issue in the past of just skipping over major character moments and the character's trauma, so it was genuinely refreshing to get an episode that focused entirely on it. I still didn't have much of an emotional reaction to Frost's death, but I genuinely love all the little vignettes of the episode. Ultimately, the episode loses me once Caitlin arrives. It just felt a little too sappy. I mean, they unironically played Billie Eilish. It was just kind of whatever. The episode was shot very well too, so that's pretty good. Another thing that makes these interludes work so much better too is that they managed to actually tie into the arcs a lot more. Funeral for a Friend is basically just a coda to Death Revisited. You could put that at the end of the arc and it would make perfect sense to be there. And Into the Still Force is absolutely a prelude to the end of the season. This is an awesome episode. It builds up on the Still Force in some crazy, bonkers ways, making it seem like some unknowable dimension, which is exactly how I think it should be. I have always found the big plot twist with Dion here cool, and seeing him attempt to lure Barry into the Still Force and trap him there is really awesome. Barry calling out through time and being able to interact with the real world is sick, and the climax of the episode with him and Nora, who got there because the good Dion sent her there, it's not really important. It's a pretty cool climax, and I like how it establishes that Barry can tap into the Still Force, which, like I said, is important to the overall season, showing that Force users can tap into other forces. The following episode, The Curious Case of Bartholomew Allen, is a very fascinating one. I actually think it's a great episode. It's a really fun return to form and classic Flash episode. Barry has a quirky little conundrum, there's a generic baddie, and he saves the day from with the help of his friends. It also just so happens to have a lot of great emotional moments with Barry growing older and losing his memory. He's worried that he'll never see Iris again. It's truly great stuff. Unfortunately, it can be a little jarring watching Barry and the team joylessly bounce around playing Dungeons & Dragons while Iris has vanished somewhere throughout time. I can mostly look past it, but this episode feels horribly placed in the season. I don't see why this couldn't come between Funeral and Into the Still Force, and just have Iris vanish at the end of this one instead. But it's whatever. And that's 16 episodes in. The season is 20 episodes, and we're rapidly approaching the final graphic novel. One that will tie up a storyline introduced exactly a season ago in Season 7, Episode 16. And how do they see fit to treat this long-running and ongoing mystery? With 4 episodes. Fuck it, 4 episodes again! What? Well, technically 3. I don't give a damn what showrunner Eric Wallace says. Episode 17, Keep It Dark, does not belong in the storyline. I don't know why this is counted as part of the storyline, and Into the Still Force is an interlude episode, because they should be swapped. This episode is the season's worst episode by a country mile. It has nothing to do with the storyline. A new speedster shows up and Barry goes to visit imprisoned Thawne, and that's it for actual story relevancy. It amounts to practically 5 minutes of the entire episode. The rest of it is focused on Allegra and the return of Black Hole's gang of criminals, which I already said I do not care about without Joseph Carver involved. And the ongoing plot with Allegra's feud is just so stupid. And I haven't even talked about the integral plot line going on with Allegra and Iris's co-workers. I don't care about Allegra. I like her scenes with Chester enough because I like Chester, but Allegra herself does nothing for me. She's saddled with some of the worst stories in Season 7. If this era of the show failed one character over anybody else, it was Allegra Garcia. Anyways, 3 episodes, huh? To wrap up the entire season and the storyline. Good thing they're all great. The Man in the Yellow Tie should get an award for how much storyline it throws in without ever falling apart. Barry finally meets this nude speedster, a scientist named Mina Dawan, and the show introduces a new major player this close into the end of the season and expects it to work. So why does it almost work? Now, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say she's an exceptional character, but she is memorable and gets more character stuff to do than Allegra got during the entire final run of the show. The episode features Barry training her, which I thought was pretty cool, however not nearly as cool as the other major card the episode has up its sleeve. Eobard Thawne is back. Oh, not that one, the original one. How the hell is he here? Didn't Barry reunify the timeline? Is this Thawne before he got his powers? Well... The dynamic this brings to the show is so fucking cool. Mina and Eobard are in a relationship, and the machine that leads to her gaining powers was created by Eobard. Of course, if you know anything about Eobard, is that the machine actually taps into the negative speed force, so that's what Mina's using. We slowly see her lose control until Barry has to face her and allow for Eobard Thawne and her to reconnect so that he can act as her lightning rod. I established earlier that I really liked that Eobard's obsessive personality is what drove him to hate Barry, so it's really cool to see that obsessive personality on display here, but in obsessive and positive emotion. He doesn't just obsessively hate Barry, he is obsessive. He doesn't love Mina, he loves her more than anything in the world. And again, it's really cool to see his extreme hatred be replaced with an extreme love and care. It draws a lot of great parallels between his evil version and his good version, and seeing this version and Barry team up was just so damn good. The final 2 episodes of the storyline, of which I'll just call negative, are some of the craziest and yet somehow coherent episodes of the entire show. Starting off in part 1, it's really cool how we just jump into it. The cause behind Iris's time sickness has been the negative forces, presumably the negative still force. When the Speed Force gave Thawne a new body, she effectively turned him into an avatar just like Dion, Alexa, and Bashir, and herself. And when Barry removed the powers of Thawne and Armageddon, he destroyed their avatar of the negative Speed Force. So they, of course, go back in time, poison Iris a year ago, letting the infection spread, and all of those healing sessions with Dion were actually just passing the sickness into him, and her vanishing was only negative Dion shifting her throughout time and space. All of this so she can be lined up in the perfect spot, right between a bolt of lightning shot by Barry and himself. Iris's death allows for whatever the negative forces were cooking to be used to recreate the Reverse Flash, who they actually killed earlier in the episode because he conflicted with their plans. Now, does this make a ton of sense? Not really, but also it doesn't not make sense either. Like, it's nonsense for sure, but also just like follows a linear timeline of events that coherently follow each other. Watching Barry team up with Mina and give Thawne speed was really cool. It did scare me watching Barry give Eobard Thawne some speed though, but seeing as how it didn't corrupt him and he was able to stay the same is just further proof that this is a completely different man. And it's a shame though that he's just a nest for the Reverse Flash to be reborn. Cue Thawne literally ripping his own face off to reveal Tom Cavanaugh. All of this moves us into part 2, which is probably my single favorite finale of the entire show. With Iris dead, Barry's hellbent on just killing Thawne, and who can blame him? I mean, it's your typical Barry trying to do whatever he can based on revenge, but I think he's earned it this time. Watching him go against the team feels valid, and you want him to wring Thawne's neck. But by the time that he enters the negative Speed Force, we actually see Thawne being turned into a vessel for all of the negative forces combined. I couldn't help but feel giddy. The climax of this episode is utterly fucking bonkers. Team Flash, now with Bart and Nora, face off against the negative Reverse Flash as he sends Mina, Nora, and Bart a million years into the past. Barry stands against an unstoppable foe, Thawne, once again, who utters "who's faster now," proving that this is all still a game to him, is about to kill Barry. And as he's about to kill his nemesis, the other forces step right in. Barry and Thawne are now both charged up with all of the forces, and the two go at it in one of the coolest action scenes of the entire show. I really can't believe people hate this episode because this shit is utterly insane. The two of them use all the abilities of the forces and a really cool CGI set piece. All the while, Iris awakens in a sort of purgatory. She's met with Damien Dark and is informed that she's being preserved inside of his time stone, one of the MacGuffins from Armageddon that Barry was able to use to combine all the timelines together. We get a really awesome subplot though where Iris literally forces herself back to life. She's Barry's lightning rod, and for once he was her lightning rod. He needs her now more than ever as he and Thawne continue to fight. The ferocity of their battle is ripping apart the fabric of Central City. It's apocalyptic. It's Armageddon. The fact that Barry and Thawne's final battle, no matter when or where it takes place, will bring about the end of the world is such a cool idea. And so with Iris back, she only has one thing to do: convince Barry to stop. He does. In the final hour of their rivalry, Barry stops fighting. He sits on the ground and he meditates. Thawne's outraged, of course. He lashes out, destroying the city in his anger. An event which Barry, using the Still Force, is able to reverse the flow of, leading all of the energy into Thawne and killing him. And after centuries of fighting, the Flash has defeated his greatest enemy by simply sitting still. And with this, we conclude season 8. It was crazy, isn't it? Overall, it's really good. It has an air of finality to it as well. You know, Ronnie was brought back. Barry defeated his greatest enemy. A character died. They bring back Eddie really quick for an episode. It's a shame that this isn't where the show actually ended because, unfortunately, we'll get to that. But I would have walked away from Negative Part 2 extremely satisfied with this as the ending of the show. Unfortunately, they had other ideas. And now it's time to talk about that. Season 8 gets an 8.5 out of 10. What is it that makes ending so hard? Is it the expectation that it needs to be good? Is it the feeling of needing to wrap up everything in a neat little bow? What about when you have no stories left to tell? What about when it's a final lap that just didn't need to happen? Following the conclusion of Season 8, there's really no story left to tell. All of the major story arcs have concluded with the exception of a minor cliffhanger. Barry's defeated his greatest foe, Iris was cured, there's just no cliffhanger to speak of, and showrunner Eric Wallace even said that he wrote the finale of Season 8 to serve as the series finale. So why is there another season? If it was to be a final lap that plays the hits and ends this monumental series on a high note, then Season 9, my friend, you failed. Masterfully failed. It doesn't start so bad though. The opener of the season, Wednesday Ever After, is an enjoyable romp through a time loop. It features Barry and Iris as the main characters, and it's probably the most domestic this couple has felt since season 4, and I think it's a pretty great episode. Captain Boomerang is really fun in it, and I think he's probably the best rogue the show has had in a long time. And I think the episode serves as a very nice coda to season 8. I mean, it takes place right after season 8, so it does feel like, you know, what would happen immediately after. Barry is scared of everything happening to Iris again, so scared that he creates a roadmap to know what's ahead, and Iris, well, she went from trapped in a mirror to adrift in time, so she really just wants to relax. The clash that the two experience is very real and very nice to watch. I think the episode has a nice balance of comedy, heart, and just everything you want out of an episode of The Flash, and I was excited for the rest of the season if this was the tone we were going to take. Unfortunately, this episode works more as the end of season 8 than it does as a preview of season 9. You see, I don't think season 9 of The Flash is a fan service season that wants to relive the hits. I don't even think it ever tried to be. Instead, I think this is a show on its last limbs limping along until it gets shot to death. Hear No Evil fully thrusts us into the next installment of the first graphic novel of season 9, entitled Rogue War. If I had to give an award to the most dull episode of The Flash, I think it'd go to this one. It's not just in content, but the feelings, the dialogue, the atmosphere and visuals, everything about it is just so dour. It feels so uninteresting. There's no passion to anything going on. And there should be. I neglected to mention it during season 8, but I mentioned it at the start here. Caitlin, after the death of Frost, decides to go on a crazed mission to bring Frost back. I think it's an insane plotline, and I think it's kind of cool. At least one of the coolest scenes of that season where Barry destroys all of her resource with a big power burst and a great moment that completely shuts her down, and honestly that should have been the end of the plot line. However, with the renewal of season 9, the show decides to continue it, leading to Caitlin putting herself into a chamber to bring back Frost, and in her place is Keone. And did I mention that Caitlin's dead now? Who is Keone? Would you believe me if I said I have no fucking clue? I mean, the name means ice goddess or something. We established that in season 5, but what starts as a random character created for no reason suddenly turns into a being with elemental powers that make her more powerful than the Speed Force itself. If I had to take a guess, my guess would be that it was Eric Wallace's attempt at integrating something like the Green, a force in DC Comics that connects all force of nature, into the show. I don't think it ends up working well though, because the show never spends enough time to develop it, but I think it functions adjacently to the other forces of nature in a way that could have made sense if they had more time to talk about it. It's fucking flabbergasting though, because they sure as hell spend enough time on Keone herself. More than enough, too much time. I mean, we're treated to scenes of her and Chillblaine, who is a series regular now, by the way, kissing and fighting, and we're treated to training montages and scenes of her talking to plants, everything but an actual exploration of her or her abilities. The show sort of just settles on her being some form of goddess, and then it never really goes any further with it beyond the surface level. Anyway, Hear No Evil episode 2 of the season is an episode dedicated entirely to Keone, so if my rant I just went on is any indication, I don't like the episode. It doesn't help that this episode is saddled with a subplot that's actually relevant to the ongoing graphic novel. Pied Piper, yes, the one from season 1 and who returned in season 6, is back and he needs help. He just sort of shows up in Star Labs out of nowhere, and the team helps him fight for his boyfriend. I think the plot ultimately builds into Rogues of War, which is an actually solid episode. You see, someone's creating a team of these rogues. For what purpose? Apparently to build a cosmic treadmill, since you can just build one of those now. Barry decides the only way to stop them is to create his own team of rogues. Now, why he doesn't just team up with Allegra, Cecile, his kids from the future, is anyone's guess, but I guess it's a cool team up. Barry's team consists of Pied Piper, the Hotness, who again is way better than he should be ever since that season 8 episode, and Goldface. Hell yeah, now this is a real team, bro. We got Goldface on this, we got the Hotness, we got Pied Piper, and Chillblaine. Bro, who invited you? What? And this episode is really, really solid. It's a heist episode with some fun dynamics throughout the characters. I enjoy the good Rogues team. I think their discussions with Barry are pretty fun to watch. I love how they all figure out that he's the Flash pretty easily. Overall, it's just a really enjoyable heist episode and one of my favorites of the season. It's a shock that it's in this arc because it's saddled with so much garbage around it. However, Chillblaine has to betray the team, and then we're introduced to the villain behind these rogues, Red Death. If you're unaware of who that is, Red Death in the comics is a perverted and evil version of Batman who has the Speed Force. And so who is the villain of the first half of the final season of The Flash? It's Batwoman. Specifically Batwoman from an alternate timeline. The season basically flies off the rails here. Red Death is such a terrible villain. She's a bad villain in general, but even more so a terrible villain for where we are in the series currently. This is meant to be the final stretch of episodes and we're given a villain that is from another show. I mean, I get that in comic books this is normal, but it doesn't translate well into a TV show at all, especially because she's not just a one-off episode villain. If it was a one-off interlude, I think it'd actually be fine, but it makes no sense for her to be the main villain, especially since Barry hasn't had a real interaction with this new Batwoman. We end off episode 4, the penultimate episode of the arc, by the way, with Barry powerless and Chillblaine presumed dead. Going into episode 5, titled Mask of the Red Death Part 2, we're treated to an episode that gives Family Matters and Finish Line a run for their money when it comes to being the worst episodes of the show. Suddenly, Red Death no longer wants to take revenge on Barry, and she decides she needs to take over the entire world. She creates these bizarre clones of herself that remind me of a Doctor Who plotline, and marches forth on Central City to take total control. Suddenly, we learn that Red Death was utilizing the mind powers of Gorilla Grodd somehow to take over the city. Barry, who thought he redeemed Grodd back in season 6, is obviously confused. He seeks out Grodd, who reveals that he's evil again for no real reason. It's actually shown in a very funny looking shot where the VFX is so poorly done that it doesn't even look like Barry's looking at anything. Then we get to probably the part that pisses me off the most, and it shouldn't because the show does stupid things like this all the time. But this is where I was talking about in season 8 where Sometimes stupid things happen that don't make sense, but they happen in a linear order of events where cause and effect makes it make enough sense. That does not happen here. Barry has given his speed back that Red Death took by Gorilla Grodd.
And I heard you were running low. How'd you get your speed back?
3 years ago, I gave a spark of my speed force to a sentient gorilla. And it was still inside his mind this whole time.
Now, why does this bother me? It's an attempt to explain how this logically works, and they fail to explain it. Anyway, Barry defeats Red Death in, again, an admittedly cool fight scene. I feel like I say that a lot, but some of the fight scenes are pretty dope. And then Batwoman comes out of buttfuck nowhere to help Barry, despite them establishing a few episodes ago that she was MIA, and they never explained where she was. And look, I asked this at the end of the Forces graphic novel, but I mean it even more so here. What did we gain from this arc? The Forces one might be worse, but I think this one's painful just with how boring it is. It's got some cool ideas and 2 good episodes, but 3 of them are just so lacking in anything substantive that I think this might just be the worst graphic novel because it gave me so little to care about. For me though, the biggest issue of season 9, even outside of the main plot, is the subplots, because I think we're back to season 7 levels with these where they just suck. The first of which deals with Joe and Cecile. And look, I've not hated Cecile. I think she's a decent character, and when given the right material, she can really shine. But her plot with Joe this season was genuinely terrible. From the opening moments of the premiere, Joe was spouting some nonsense about needing to leave Central City, and I know Jesse L. Martin scored a lead on a new show, which is great for him, but the way they've written him off is straight up character assassination. Despite the fact that it takes 5 episodes for the plot to go anywhere besides circles every episode, his final decision to take Jenna away from Cecile and only let her see her daughter on weekends is just cruel. And the fact that Cecile agrees to it is baffling in its own right. This is so wildly out of character for Joe to even bring up, and I think it honestly ruins the character entirely. I honestly wish the characters had just had a falling out or a divorce arc, because it would make way more sense than whatever the hell this was. And then in episode 6 of the season, they try to create drama out of it. And by the way, episode 6 of the season is probably the worst episode of the entire show. We get a terrible story about Cecile missing Jenna's birthday, even ignoring the fact that this is in February and Jenna's birthday is in August. Cecile literally spends the entire runtime with a character that can teleport, and it's never brought up to just do that. The following and final, quote, interlude of the show is a complete waste of television. It's 4 episodes long. Keep in mind this season is 13 episodes. We just wasted 5 of those on the stupid Red Death storyline. The good, the bad, and the lucky is, like I said, by far without a shadow of doubt the worst episode the show has ever produced. It's honestly confusing, and the less I think about it the better. It's just a waste, man. It's a waste of screen time. It's a waste of money for producing it. It's a waste of my brain cells for consuming it. It's a waste of my electricity for typing about it. It's a waste of your time for me talking about it. What else is there to even talk about, man? I mean, Wildest Dreams, that episode just sort of exists. I'm happy that's not complete failure of an episode, but I mean, it's a Supergirl crossover, and I never really watched that show, so it's hard for me to be too attached to an episode like this. A similar statement can be made about episode 8, Partners in Time. Although I think this one works a lot better than episode 7. For one, it's a really funny episode that works in multiple ways. The plot is actually engaging, and I think the mystery, while simple, works well enough, and the guest characters are funny and add to the stress that Barry and Iris go through. The two even get a really great scene where they talk about the stresses of being parents soon. It's wholesome and it's sweet, and it's just... There's only 5 episodes left of this entire show now, man. Where did the time go? Okay, so the final graphic novel of the show is only technically 4 episodes, but because of the insane quality jump between episodes 8 and 9 of the season, I consider the final stretch of the show to begin with episode 9, It's My Party and I'll Die If I Want To. And holy shit, this episode is incredible. It was hyped up to high hell during the season, and it was even given its own movie-length trailer to promote it. It's been a really long time since a single episode of the show was given this much fanfare. And it makes sense. Stephen Amell is back for his final portrayal of Oliver Queen. Diggle's back too, it's really cool. It's just a fantastic episode that works on every level. It'd be easy to just call it the Green Arrow fan service episode, and like, it is just that, but the episode does so much more than that. It's the first episode featuring Wally West since season 6's Death of the Speed Force, and he's again absolutely incredible in it. In just 42 minutes, the show is able to examine his tumultuous relationship with Barry and come to closure with it, all while battling the best villain of the show, Bloodwork. Yeah, I really don't care what anyone says. This episode for me cemented Ramsey Rosso as my favorite villain on the entire show. He mentioned it all the way back in season 6 episode 17 that he was playing the long game, and I knew his return was going to be awesome, and I was right. His plan is fairly simple this time around. Instead of infecting everyone in Central City to stop Death, he's going to infect every single multiverse. Oliver reveals to Barry that Red Death is even from one of those alternate Earths and not an alternate timeline. That would have been really cool to know earlier. This episode feels like a true callback to another one of my favorite episodes of the show, The Last Temptation of Barry Allen Part 1. I talked about that like an hour ago in this video. I'm losing it. Ramsey takes control of Wally like he does Barry in that episode, and he throws both Barry and Wally around into some crazy visions, which I thought were really, really good and really awesome. It even ends up with Barry being on the set of a show called Flash Facts, which has really funny fourth wall breaks in it. Perhaps Bloodwork's most interesting mind games, though, come in the form of what he does to Wally. We've always known that Wally had a messed up youth, but this episode takes it even further. Ramsey's plan, again, is very similar to his first master plan. Except this time, he needs to turn Wally into a blood brother because he can access the new multiverse. Apparently, Wally can see into the multiverse. I'm not sure entirely how, but it's a cool power, so I'm not really going to have an issue with it. After the two of them wake up from their trips, Wally and Barry talk, and Barry dies. Yeah, Wally kills Barry. He legitimately kills Barry. Actually, Barry Allen dies here. That's nuts. The rest of the episode is your standard fare, but man, is it awesome. Oliver comes back to life. For being the final crossover of the entire show, this episode completely nails what made them work in the first place. And with that, we arrive at the final graphic novel of the show's run. It's 4 episodes, and it's titled A New World. I feel like there's a split when it comes to this arc. A lot of people like some episodes of it, but as for me, I think it's a strong final few episodes of the show, featuring 2 of my favorites of the entire run. What you have to understand about me is that through all of this, through every negative word I've written about this series, I truly adore it. If you don't like it, I understand. If you think the finale failed you, I understand. But for me, it did everything I needed it to and treated me to some really cool shit. A New World Part 1 opens up with a bang, just giving us an episode that a lot of us had only dreamed we'd get. Barry is transported back in time and finds himself back on the exact day his mother is murdered. This episode is brilliant. I mean, from the framing to the pacing, the character work, it's hard for me to write about because I feel like anyone watching this that hasn't seen this episode should just watch this episode. I love how this episode signals Barry finally coming to terms with what happened that night. What was once his darkest night is now a night of triumph. The fact that he gets to be the one to tell Thawne that he wins and he'll be okay in the end is a great way to cap off Barry's relationship with this version of Thawne. And then we even get the full circle moment. They actually went and did it. They showed us the events of season 1's finale from our current perspective. These 2 episodes in a row make you question, what the hell were they smoking with the rest of the season? Because clearly they can cook. And we get a teaser at the end of the true final villain of the entire show, Eddie Thawne. Pretty much every fan of the show wanted and expected Eddie to show up again as a villain, so it makes sense that they went ahead and did it here. My thoughts aren't extremely nuanced or anything. I think it's a fucking awesome idea. Sure, it can be frustrating that he's effectively only the villain for the series finale, but I think it's much more interesting to see his descent into villainy than to have him be a full villain for all 4 episodes. But I guess that might just be me. Luckily, part 3 is a pretty damn good penultimate episode of the show. I'll get 2 things out of the way though that I know people are going to talk about. One, the fact that 2049 Star Labs' team is the exact same is pretty laughable. And secondly, and this is about Cecile, and this is why some people call the show The Cecile, we're given a plot that takes up half the episode about how Cecile can't use her powers because she doesn't feel good or some shit. I don't know, fucking stupid plot. Anyway, the rest of the episode is awesome. Eddie's roaming around, finding himself at the Flash Museum, seeing that his sacrifice did absolutely nothing. It's the exact kind of stuff that I wanted with bringing him back to life in the first place. Just in general, with the exception of the Cecile hiccups, I think this episode really nailed the downfall of Eddie and the setup for the series finale. Now we have the series finale. This is what I've spent the past, 9 years of my life building up to, and the past 3 hours or so of your time talking to get up to. And I love it, guys. I do. It's stupid. It's cheesy. It makes no sense. It has bad CGI. It's cringe. It's all of those things, but one of the most hopeful pieces of television that I've ever seen. It ends off with a message of pure hope and optimism that the world can be better for the people that come after us, and I think that's really cool. Of course, we gotta talk about the stupid stuff. Immediately, we're thrust into the return of Barry's biggest speedster villains. I'm talking Zoom. I'm talking Savitar. I'm talking Godspeed. Why is Godspeed here? Who invited, bro? Yeah, anyway, Thawne's here too. The scene of all the villains bickering is really funny and a really good bit, and I really love seeing them all interact and team up against Barry.
It's all of it. Love your work, although slightly derivative, don't you think? Pretending to be the Flash's ally. Let's see, whose playbook is that from?
You mocking me?
Now you're catching on. Good, Zoom.
I'm the
The actual conflict with all the speedsters is, it's a little lame. Okay, I'll admit that. Still, I like aspects of it. I will say the episode should have been Barry, Nora, Bart, Wally, and Jay, or, you know, maybe Dion or one of the Forces. This season just completely forget the Forces exist, and it's bizarre not to feature Jay in the big final fight since he's in the episode. Still, the actual fight scenes are pretty dope, and I love the big shot through the city where it transitions to each individual fight. But truly, at the end of the day, they're all needless fan service. I don't care about any of these returning villains. I really, really don't. And I think harping on them only serves to devalue the presence of Eddie, who is the actual villain here that needs to be stopped. Barry and Jay stop him from killing all of Jitters and then watch as he enters the negative Speed Force to juice himself up. Barry knows it's going to end up just like Thawne if he goes through with it, and he's not going to let that happen again, so he has to stop him. What follows is a surprisingly fantastic scene between Barry and Keone, of all people. Keone convinces Barry that in order to truly save the day, he has to stop the cycle of violence. The negative Speed Force can't be stomped out because it'll always come back. True balance isn't one side triumphing over the other, it's coexisting. I think this is one of Grant's best scenes of the entire show and one of the best of his entire career. You can just really feel his stress and anguish, and I love how it leads into the climax of the episode. The final face-off with Eddie is really great. Seeing Eddie just beat the hell out of Barry and throw him into the wall is brutal to watch, but you can't stop watching. I love how Barry gets through to Eddie too. I mean, it's a logical conclusion. We knew Eddie would be redeemed. Of all of the villains in the show, he makes the most sense, and it's a great ending when it happens. He's not redeemed only to die, because he and Barry realize the only way to truly preserve anything in this world anymore is to stop fighting. The final 20 minutes or so of the episode are just entirely dedicated to wrap up. I mean, Nora's born, there's a cool lullaby scene with Joe, Chester finds out he still has black hole powers, and Cecile and Joe finally get engaged. No idea why that took so long. Keone is visited by Timeless Wells and learns it's time for her to ascend to a higher plane. Sure. Eventually she becomes a combination of elements and then turns back into Caitlin. And you know what? Cool. I don't like Caitlin that much, but her death, like I said, it felt weird. And objectively speaking, this character has done nothing the entire show but suffer. So for her to then just die with no fanfare, it's kind of messed up. And it's nice to have her back at the end of the day. The final scene of the show, though, is what seals this as one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. It's crazy what the last 2 minutes of an episode can do. Barry monologues as he does one final run through the city, passing on powers to those who deserve it, while Blake Neely delivers his best musical piece in the entire franchise. The series has long been made fun of for being full of pep talks and redeeming villains, but is that such an issue? Why can't I just be reminded that in this cold, dark world that we live in, some people are just good? Barry Allen is the paragon of love, and this show is all about love, optimism, and the good in people. It's such a beautiful message to end off the show with, and it just makes the show all the better, and this finale all the better. Barry created a new world, a world where nothing is impossible as long as we believe in it. And I definitely do. So, why was this called The Decay of the Flash? If I like 2 out of the 4 seasons a lot, what makes it a decay? Well, I titled part 1 The Legacy of the Flash because I think for better or worse, those are the years people are going to think back on. That'll be the lasting legacy of the show, and you know, if those are the golden ages for you, more power to you. The tragedy of the show for me is that there's no true golden age to it. It's not like Supernatural where I can split it up and say this is what you should watch, this is what you shouldn't watch. It's inconsistent throughout, and it just so happens that 2 of my favorite seasons happen in this era, and 2 of the worst happen within the same era. For every fresh villain and new idea, we're given 5 new characters that don't work. For every awesome villain we were treated to, we were given some of the worst antagonists in the entire Arrowverse. Did Eric Wallace's tenure do more good than harm? That's hard to say. I think it did more harm. While I really, really do like season 6 and 8, I think the damage that he contributed with season 7 and season 9, as far as the reputation of the show go, really just ran it down a cliff. And I think at the end of the day, as far as perception goes, he did harm. As far as quality goes, it's up in the air. I mean, it's literally split down the middle with 2 good seasons and 2 bad seasons. I think he's truly creative, and I think he breathed a ton of life into the show, but I also think he needed someone to rein him in, and everything he brought out was far more creative, but it wasn't always a good thing. As for the format change, I feel the exact same. I mean, when it worked, we got season 6 and 8, seasons that told multiple stories with multiple villains, and everything worked out well, and they were fresh and interesting and fun. However, when the outcome was something like season 7 and 8, and the villains sucked, and the stories felt disconnected and boring and bland, I think the graphic novel format really hindered the show more than anything. At the end of the day, The Flash really isn't a show that I would call very good in the traditional sense. It's just over 9 seasons and 184 episodes of the show. There's cringe moments, there's terrible writing, there's corny dialogue, and there's storylines that make absolutely no sense. But it's also been full of spectacle, great acting, terrific set pieces, and some emotional moments that still hit me like a ton of bricks. The Flash is a dumb, campy superhero show, and that's all I'll ever view it as, but it's my dumb, campy superhero show. Without The Flash, I wouldn't have got into writing about TV and movies. I wouldn't have found a passion for creating, whether it's writing a screenplay for a TV show I want to write, or even just video editing, something that I'm pursuing a degree in now. I'd never met some of my closest friends I've ever had, one of whom was kind enough to do the audio editing for this video.
Oh hey, that's me!
Hell, without The Flash, there is no JayTheZoomster. The name itself derives from the show. This is easily the most important piece of media that has existed for me, and I think it'll always continue to be that. Thank you so much for joining me on this endeavor. Being able to talk about the show with this much and like this, and show it to all you people who I know are watching it, has been the dream of a lifetime. It's been incredibly fulfilling, and I cannot wait to see what comes next. This is JayTheZoomster, and I'm signing off.